Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. We have a great one for you today on the show. We're going to be leading off with the Derek Chauvin trial and what happened specifically in today's proceedings, where the longest-serving officer in the Minneapolis Police Department said Chauvin violated policy for failing to move George Floyd off his stomach as he knelt on him for more than 9 minutes. And a lot of people probably at home are going to be saying he did a lot more than just violate policy there, but we'll get into it all for you. Also, we're going to be doing a pretty detailed breakdown of what's in this new Georgia voting law that you've been hearing so much about, and that's really caused massive business backlash, as well as backlash from the Democratic side of things. Also, speaking of the Democratic side of things, at least as far as corruption is concerned, Andrew Cuomo sought a $4 million book deal. New details about that coming from the New York Times as the aides, as he was telling his aides to hide that damaging death toll. Last but not least, we will be finishing off today's show with a little bit about new charges in the Jeffrey Epstein case against Ghislane Maxwell, the one remaining kingpin, I guess, in the Jeffrey Epstein empire that still in custody, trying to get information out of. All right, we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about today, but we are starting with this Derek Chauvin trial. And this was pretty much the big day for the long-serving officer in the Minneapolis Police Department. So he said on Friday that Derek Chauvin, and by the way, this man's name is Richard Zimmerman, Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman. He said on Friday that Derek Chauvin had violated department policy by kneeling on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes as he lay handcuffed on his stomach. So a lot of people obviously are going to be saying he does a lot more than just violate policy, but that is definitely kind of an official acknowledgement of someone who is deeply, and this is a pretty significant thing. Like, this is something that, the police community very rarely does this. You have someone who is a very, prominent member in, the kind of old boys club of the police community. And when I say that, I mean that, the PBA of the NYPD, that when they have a press conference, it's like, some guys that look like they're all in the mafia. They're in these big jackets. They're big, burly white dudes standing behind them, and talking them up. The guy Pat Lynch. If you watch any of the Pat Lynch press conferences, for the PBA, the NYPD police union, it's just big burly white guys all yelling about how unfair the liberals are, but at the same time, the NYPD as a whole is one of the most diverse police forces. I think the most diverse in the country. So something there is not adding up. And this guy, I mean, he's been around a long time. I'm sure he's kind of steeped in, the whole, the thin blue line Punisher culture. And at least, he probably knows a lot of people who are. And if that is someone that high up and that prominent in terms of position in the department, is coming out and saying, yeah, this guy, one of our own, who's been around a while, he broke policy. And that is something that they rarely do. It's very much kind of a code of silence, kind of a omerta among police officers in terms of the way that they speak about actions done to people and the various trouble that various officers get themselves in. He even testified in court that what Chauvin had done was, quote, totally unnecessary, unquote. Pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on a neck for that amount of time, it's just uncalled for. His testimony came on the fifth day of the Chauvin trial, and the former police officer charged. Apologize about that. Momentary technical difficulties there. But pretty much what happened was the testimony for this testimony came on the fifth day of the trial for Derek Chauvin, and followed the testimony from Chauvin's supervisor, who said on Thursday that Chauvin should have stopped holding Mr. Floyd down when he came unresponsive. So it's a very kind of interesting strategy of what the prosecution trying to do here, because the defense is saying, well, yes, this was this is the kind of the very tough case that they have to make here, that this was a logical, sensible, sound police move. Like, this was something that a normal police officer should do. Like, it was justified use of force. That is what the defense is trying to prove. And it's very, very hard to do that if you have all of the most senior figures in Chauvin's kind of orbit in the Minneapolis Police Department coming out and saying for a fact that this was completely uncalled for, and it completely gives police officers and use of force a bad name. Not that it doesn't already have them, for just well beyond things that happened with Derek Chauvin. But it is a very, very powerful case, and it's probably something that the defense is going to have a tough time refuting, because how can you, in the end, refute something where you have all these people coming out in such high positions and clear areas of competence about the issue, and saying that one singular thing so clearly? Like, it's very, very apparent here. So prosecutors have sought to show that Chauvin's actions were unusually violent and that he failed to follow the department's policies on force. Lieutenant Zimmerman said officers are taught to move handcuffed people out of their prone position as quickly as possible by turning them on their side or sitting them up, and that they had never been trained to kneel on people's necks while they were handcuffed and lying on their stomachs. He said, quote, "You need to get them off their chest," he said. "If you're lying on your chest, that's constricting your breathing even more." And, that seems to be the point there. Like, that seems to be what Chauvin was trying to do. He was going in almost for the kill. He was going for the suffocation. He was going for the squeeze of the air pipes. Like, that's clear. And it's very, very clear coming from someone like Lieutenant Zimmerman. Eric J. Nelson, the lawyer for Chauvin, it's like, what a position to be in, used his cross-examination of Lieutenant Zimmerman to note that he was in the investigations unit and may not be as familiar with the force that uniformed officers have to use. Nelson suggested earlier this week that Floyd was turned slightly to his side. He has tried to move the jurors' attention away from the widely seen video that shows Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. Lieutenant Zimmerman said police officers had a duty to take care of a person they had handcuffed, and it said very clearly, his safety is your responsibility. His well-being is your responsibility. I mean, it's in principle, it's probably a thing that very, very few police officers actually abide by, but it is a principle that is part of Minneapolis Police Department policy and part of probably policy for police officers all over the country. But just generally the thing is, Lieutenant Zimmerman acknowledged that people who are handcuffed can still be combative and try to hurt officers, such as by kicking them, but they usually only present a minor threat. And that's such a great example. It's such a clear instance and point that also applies to another case that I think really is egregious, and that is, I believe his name is Daniel Prude, in Rochester, New York, who was suffering from a mental health breakdown. And the police pretty much suffocated him by putting a paper bag over his face because he was coughing on them and claimed that he had COVID. So it's just insane that that's how he died. And then it's just another example of all this same mindset and same culture that has taken hold of the police department. Lieutenant Zimmerman had been in the department since 1985 and was among a group of just 14 police officers who published a public letter last June to condemn Chauvin. "This is not who we are," the letter said. Friday was not the first time Lieutenant Zimmerman had testified in a high-profile case involving police violence. In 2019, he testified in the case of a fatal shooting by a Minneapolis police officer in a well-lit, contradicting argument from the officer's lawyers that the lighting in the area was poor. So he pretty much contradicted that for that one specific case there that they were trying to make. So the officer who secured the scene after Floyd's death also testified. Witness testimony resumed Friday morning with Sergeant John Edwards of the Minneapolis Police Department taking the stand. Sergeant Edwards was sent to Cup Foods to secure the crime scene after police officers pinned Floyd to the ground outside of the convenience store. In response to questions from the prosecution, Sergeant Edwards testified that he had arrived around the scene around 9:35 p.m. on May 25th after being notified of a possible critical incident. He said he had followed standard procedures to secure the area. Those procedures included instructing two officers, who were still the same, Thomas Lane and Alex Kung, to turn on their body cameras, asking the officers to identify the locations where they had interacted with Mr. Floyd, and directing them to put crime scene tape around the area to preserve potential evidence. Sergeant Edwards also testified he had summoned other officers to conduct a door-to-door canvass for anyone who witnessed the events, because at that point, probably most onlookers had dispersed. I guess we were just trying to get lucky. Maybe there was someone that was still willing to talk to us. Probably not the best time to be a police officer after trying to talk to people who are probably at peak levels of disgust with police right after they witnessed something like that. At the scene that night, however, Mr. McMillan, Charles McMillan, refused to speak with police. According to Sergeant Edwards' testimony, he asked if he was under arrest, and when Sergeant Edwards said no, McMillan said he wanted to leave. A Minneapolis native, Sergeant Edward had been with the Minneapolis Police Department for more than 10 years and served in the department's 3rd Precinct, which protesters have burned last year in the wake of Floyd's death, and he's currently on leave. Sergeant Edwards was part of the Police and Black Men Project facilitated by the University of Minnesota, which seeks to develop relationships of honesty and trust in semi-weekly meetings between a small group of police officers and African-American men, according to the university's website. So it's kind of a interesting view of where his mind's at. And very kind of probably one of the toughest moments, for the prosecution was when on day 4, when Courtney Ross, Floyd's girlfriend for nearly 3 years, told the jury about his character and struggle with addiction. But I think it turned out to be very well. Like, it put Floyd in a very positive light. I mean, she was very, I think, well-spoken. And she said, I think was part of a great trend in America that is the destigmatization of drug use. And someone saying, and a lot of people already feel sympathy for Floyd, and they know what happened to him. And if they find, he was struggling with drugs, and that seems to be something that maybe many, many years ago, or not too long ago at all, really, would have hurt him a lot. But I think the way Courtney Ross spoke about him was very, very good. She talked about their first kiss and Floyd's adventurous nature. She described how he was a caring partner, a devoted father, and passionate about exercise, a guy who loved to ride his bike and play ball with the neighborhood children. In a lighter moment, she talked about one of the most famous photos of Floyd, which she called a dad selfie. She called Mr. Floyd a mama's boy and said that his mother's death left him like a shell of himself, like he was broken. And that was probably one of the really saddest things to hear, because if you are unaware, right at the end of the video before he died, he called out for his mother. So that testimony there probably particularly impactful for many, many people, especially those kind of close to the situation. Ross also detailed their shared struggle with opioid addiction, saying it started at probably a lot of Americans can really relate to this, because we do have an opioid crisis in this country, saying that they started using after being prescribed medication for chronic pain. Our story is a classic story of how so many people get addicted to opioids. We struggle from chronic pain. Mine was in my neck and his was in his back. Once their prescriptions ran out, they continued to use. Together, they felt an end of sobriety, and Floyd's use of drugs, whether that contributed to his death, is expected to be a crucial point in the trial. Prosecutors were trying to establish that Floyd, who had fentanyl and methamphetamine in his system when he died, according to the toxicology report, had a high tolerance for fentanyl, which will help them rebut the defense's claims that Floyd died of an overdose. So that's a very interesting kind of situation where they have multiple autopsies there, one kind of conducted independently, one conducted by the police department, and I'm personally more obliged to trust the independent one more, because I think, actually, to be fair though, I think they were hired, they were brought in by I think the Floyd law firm, Benjamin Crump. But I'm honestly, this shows my bias, but it's the police. The police lie. That is something that we know about time and time and again. So that is a very, very important thing I think that we get to consider. Now I do want to switch gears a little bit, and we can go into this new story. All right, so we are talking about Georgia and their voting laws. This new analysis again here in the New York Times. And here's what the New York Times has to say about it. I think it's a little dramatic. It's very dramatically put, but even for the New York Times. But here's what they say. Go page by page through Georgia's new voting law, and one takeaway stands above all others. The Republican legislature and governor have made a breathtaking assertion of partisan power in elections, making absentee voting harder and creating restrictions and complications in the wake of narrow losses to Democrats. So everything they're saying here, though, to be fair, to be 100% completely honest, is absolutely right. Obviously, they are doing this. They were embarrassed by their loss in Georgia. They thought it was a red state, and they were really kind of stunned by the lack of turnout in the Senate elections, and really by the incredible surge in turnout for the Democrats in both the Senate in general. For Ossoff and Warnock in January. So the New York Times has examined and annotated the law, identifying 16 provisions that hamper the right to vote for some Georgians and strip power from state and local election officials and give it to legislatures and legislators. Republicans passed and signed the 98-page voting law last week following the first Democratic victories in presidential and Senate elections in Georgia in a generation. President Biden won the state by just 11,779 votes out of nearly 5 million cast. The new law will, in particular, curtail ballot access for voters in booming urban suburban counties home to many Democrats. Another provision makes it a crime, and this you probably heard about, to offer water to voters waiting in lines, which tend to be longer in these densely populated communities. So you can obviously imagine all the ways this can go wrong. You got a super, it probably wouldn't be that hot, but maybe for a primary, I don't even know. But in November, it would probably not be that hot. But maybe it could be cold and they're offering coffee. But, it is really kind of insane to think about all the ways that they've clamped down on this. We can go here through some of these provisions, talk about them, and there's quite a lot. Voters will now have less time to request absentee ballots, and again, this is another one of the categories where making it easier to vote through all different forms of ways. And by the way, this could just as equally help Republicans. This is not necessarily down to Democrats, and high turnout doesn't always mean Democratic victories across the board, as we saw in the 2020 general election. That is very, very clear. And it's kind of funny and weird that they don't, the Republicans don't take that message. This is the strategy they're approving. This is the one that they've been doing for years and years, decades now, just making it harder for people to vote. This is their response. This is their response to losing, and this is their response to having just the highest amount of turnout in general election since 1919, and it wasn't good for Trump at the top of the ticket, but a lot of different times, the Republicans, for example, in the House and state legislators, and a lot of places where it really, really matters, but just aren't that flashy, they really did well. So that is with the highest turnout in 100 years or something like that. And this comes with the same. There are strict new ID requirements for absentee ballots. It's now illegal for election officials to mail out absentee ballots applications to all voters. Drop boxes are getting kind of squeezed out of existence. That's another thing. Just for convenience purposes. In cities, you've got a busy day. You want to just come in. You want to drop off your ballot. You need to pick up your kids in childcare or something but you really want to vote. You want to make your voice heard. And then you go to walk all the way miles and miles to a drop box, even though your old one was very close. That is the things. These little things that just build up and build up and build up are all in the name of voter protection, voter safety, but are so effective in kind of sapping the will, because it's people have busy lives, and it takes them a lot to get them to like jazzed up enough to get to vote for a Democrat, especially in Georgia anyway. Like, you got to do a lot of heavy lifting there. And if there's just one little thing out of place when it comes to the procedural part, like, people have busy lives, the candidate's probably not going to be that exciting, and they're not going to vote for you if it's not as easy as it possibly can be. Like, you need to make it reasonably easy, but the Republicans know that easiness benefits, you a lot of the time, at least in recent past, or just as a general trend in Georgia, and they are responding to that. And they are. And that is this is the full response here. Mobile voting centers, pretty much an RV where you can vote, are essentially banned, and that's kind of easier, I assume, for rural areas where you need to, there's not a lot of, close, densely populated areas for, precincts and things like that. I'm not sure. But early voting is expanded in a lot of small counties, but not in the most populous ones. So rural counties, like in the Northwest, where Marjorie Taylor Greene is holding court, offering food and water to voters waiting in line now risks misdemeanor charges, as you know. If you go to the wrong polling place, it will be even harder to vote. You're going to be punished for voting in the wrong place. Let's go into that one. I want to see that. So if a person presents him or herself at a polling place, absentee polling place, or registration office in his or her county of residence in this state for the purpose of casting a ballot in a primary or election, stating in good faith a belief that he or she is timely registered to vote in the county of residence in such primary or election, and the person's name does not appear on the list of registered electors, the person shall be entitled to cast a provisional ballot in his or her county of residence in this state as provided in this code section. So pretty much from 2012 to 2018, Georgia shuttered more than 214 voting precincts around the state, according to an investigation by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Those changes, many of which followed the Supreme Court's hollowing out of the Federal Voting Rights Act until 2013, confused many voters, which upon showing up to the wrong precinct had to vote with provisional ballots. This provision removes even that remedy for voters who arrived at the wrong precinct before 5 p.m., requiring them instead to travel to the correct precinct or risk being disenfranchised. So that's the kind of little curveball that they throw in there. Making it even harder in all these little ways. That is the key here. In the end of the day, there's a lot more provision that pretty much do all this kind of bad stuff. But at the end of the day, it is really about making it as hard as possible to vote. And it's all these little things that kind of prick away at you. So, yeah, and that is probably one of the most effective strategies. One of the reasons why Republicans have been so effective at holding power all these years. We'll be back in a minute.
SWRN has so much going on to tell you about. We, of course, have to start with Newsflash. We continue to make the grind to our 500th episode. That'll be on Sunday the 28th with a big panel special, bringing back some of your favorite Newsflash contributors. Until then, we'll be on the air, as always, every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday with that show. We start up our supplementary programming with a special, all-new redesign edition of Uncultured Design to highlight some of the most interesting parts of hip-hop, whether it be past or present. And, of course, we are working on that brand new season of Hidden History, continuing telling the stories we told in Season 1. Spencer Welsh Radio Network. Listen today on Spreaker.com/TSWS.
All right, thank you so much for staying with us. We got much more juice coming your way. A lot of good news to get to. And we are continuing to follow this whole rough situation for Cuomo. More little scandal after little scandal keep coming out against him. New York Times really seems to be the only journalistic outfit really pushing on Cuomo at the moment. I mean, they really just kind of seem to be mostly like CNN, all the bigger the bigger names out there just really do kind of seem to be just let him just, chill for the moment. Washington Post, MSNBC, they have not been too harsh in terms of really breaking and digging into this stuff. But the New York Times, give them credit, they have a very strong regional desk, I feel like, and that's been very, very helpful for them in terms of getting to some of the bottom of this. And they have this story now about this book deal. Jesse McKinley, Danny Hakim, and Alexandra Alter are writing this. As the coronavirus subsided in the New York Times in New York last year, Governor Andrew Cuomo had begun pitching a book that would center on his image as a hero of the pandemic, really quite literally. But by early last summer, both his book and the image had hit a critical juncture. Cuomo leaned on his top aide, Melissa DeRosa, for assistance, and she attended video meetings with publishers and helped him edit early drafts of the book. That's so cute. They're working together. They're helping sort. They're staying up late at night, finding out all the right words and the right tricks to use, all the right turns of phrase to say. So pretty much, she and really. They were all having a great time, but what happened was there was an impending health department report underway right as they were writing this book, and it pretty much threatened to disclose, as I'm sure you know, a far higher number of nursing home deaths related to the coronavirus than the Cuomo administration has previously made public. DeRosa and other top aides expressed concern about the higher death toll, and after the intervention, the number, which had appeared in the second sentence of the report, was removed from the final version. The revisions occurred as the governor was on the brink of a huge payoff, a book deal that ended with a high offer of more than $4 million, according to people with knowledge of the book's bidding process. In New York Times examination, the development of Cuomo's lucrative book deal revealed how it overlapped with the move by his most senior aides to reshape a report about nursing home deaths in a way that insulated the governor from criticism and also burnished his image. So that is what we see here, kind of Cuomo continuing to, again, play politics with people's lives, not really telling anything too major they didn't know. Pretty much all from this story is that, the book deal was just happened to be $4 million. I mean, it could have been $6 million, but the results and the optics and the reality and just the not just the optics, but the deep, awful deed that he did to this state was really laid bare. It's just absolutely insane story, and it's very, very hard to see the path forward here, depending on what this impeachment investigation comes out of in the House, what Cuomo can do, but what is there required? What is the amount of turnover that needs to be exhibited? At least some of these suburban, more moderate districts for these, this right kind of liberal, moderate, sweet spot of the Democratic base, in the suburbs of New York City, to say, you know what, I want Cuomo out, and I'm going to have to make it known to my senators and my assemblymen, because they're watching the polls. They're going very, very carefully about this, and they know what is. They're sticking their finger up in the wind, and they're definitely going to find out what happens. Because if you come at the king, you best not miss. And Cuomo has all these levers of power, but the thing is, he really rules mostly by fear. And if he runs out, and people have no reason to fear him, then he is in a lot of trouble. All right, we're going to end today a little bit of a disturbing story, to say the least. Federal prosecutors in New York on Monday filed new charges of sex trafficking, a minor, and sex trafficking conspiracy against Ghislane Maxwell, the former associate of Jeffrey Epstein. So Maxwell is accused of grooming a 14-year-old girl to engage in sexual acts with Epstein from 2001 to 2004. The abuse allegedly took place in Epstein's Palm Beach estate in Florida. The new indictment alleges that Epstein and at times Maxwell's paid 14-year-old girl, referred to minor victim 4 in court documents, to give the billionaire sexual massages. So definitely something that we know that Jeffrey was obsessed with quite a lot. The teen or Epstein were often partially or fully nude during these massages, prosecutors said. Epstein would also engage in various sexual acts with the girl at that time, they said. So you have pretty much the another instance of a lot of what we already know he did, and this just really the insane thing about this is it just happens to be with Jeffrey Epstein, and there's no one else involved. So, like, where are the people on the flight logs? Like, how does that? Like, that is really the most interesting part of this case. Obviously, hopefully Ghislane gets many years in prison, and it stays alive for them all, whether it's and she doesn't die, whether by suicide or murder or whatever you want to call it. But I think the real area of this case, and really the reason why it's so important, keep her around, keep her, able to, talk in need be, is really to find out what was the point of all that association with all those high power names. And it's hard to imagine anything like this actually happening, any kind of grand reveal happening, but I think it's a question like that is really what makes this case so special, because it could be just one billionaire being a perv. Like, that's not the most shocking thing in the world, but all this connection is really what is very interesting. And depending on the way certain things go, it's going to be interesting to see what comes from that. But yeah, for now, the vice grip is tightening on Ghislane Maxwell. That's all we got for you today. This has been Newsflash.